It's American Thanksgiving week. Let's take a closer look inside the coach's room and see who's in and who's out. Well, welcome back inside the coach's room. I'm Steve Peters. You can just call me Petey. And we've talked about this for years. And we've all read about it. We've all seen about it. Where teams are as of American Thanksgiving. And it's a good demarcation. Like, let's face it. It's a quarter of the way into the season. It's a good place to judge how teams have done in the start. First 10 games, teams are still feeling each other out. They don't know what they are. By the 20-game mark, you start to recognize trends and who teams are. I will say this. Especially in the Eastern Conference, man, this is tight. From last place to the playoff spot, from Toronto to Philadelphia, is 4 points. That's tight. In the West, there's a little more separation. You got 9 points between Nashville and Utah, so there's a little bit more separation. But let's take a closer look at Thanksgiving. And is it really true? And I know I saw Art Ocal in ESPN wrote an article on this just this morning. So if you get on ESPN.com, make sure you check out Arta's article on Does It Really Matter? Well, the reality is it's a quarter way through the season. It's a really good benchmark, especially for people in the media to talk about. That's 100% reality. Now, is the math there? Does the math carry over and say that this is, well, yeah, this is true? Well, let's take a closer look. So what I did for all of these stats, I started at the 99-2000 season, 1999-2000, and I went until 24-25. Now, I did throw out a few years. I threw out 2004 and 2013. They were both lockout. One was shortened. One wasn't at all. And then I did throw out 2020 and 2021 for the COVID shortened seasons because they weren't true playoff seasons, and Thanksgiving was a different benchmark through those seasons. So from 99 till 2000 to 2024-25, excluding those 4 seasons, what has happened on Thanksgiving? Well, there are 352 teams are in the playoffs since 99-2000. Of those 352, 269 of those teams were in a playoff position on Thanksgiving. That is 76.4% of the teams that were in on Thanksgiving Day since 99-2000 made the playoffs. 23.6% did not. In the Western Conference, it was 75.6% of the teams, 133 out of 176 teams in the Western Conference that were in made it in, 75%. So 3 out of 4 teams at Thanksgiving in the West made it in. It's even better in the East, 77.3% in, 22.7% out. So in the Eastern Conference, 136 teams that were in at Thanksgiving out of 176 teams that made the playoffs. That's 77.3%. So is 76.4% matter? Well, yeah, it does. Does that mean you can't win? No, of course not. Does that mean you can be in and you're guaranteed a spot? No, 3 and 4 teams right now are in. 6 out of 8 teams that are in the playoffs on Thanksgiving make the playoffs. Now, I did also want to go back and see when there was a perfect record. Meaning all 8 teams at American Thanksgiving. And by the way, I'm American, so we usually don't say American Thanksgiving. We say Thanksgiving. But my dad's Canadian, so you do have Canadian Thanksgiving. So for the purposes of the remainder of this show, Thanksgiving means American Thanksgiving, just in case I slip up. Sorry, but for everybody in Canada, I have Canadian roots. Sometimes I'm going to slip up and say Thanksgiving. So there's been one perfect record on American Thanksgiving where all 8 teams in a conference were in the playoff spot, and all 8 of those teams made the playoffs, and it happened in 2008, 2009, and in the Eastern Conference, and the Pittsburgh Penguins went on to win the Stanley Cup in 2008-9. Every team made it, but it happens. I tell you what, 7 out of 8 happens a lot. 7 out of 8 teams making the playoffs, 7 in at Thanksgiving go on to make the playoffs. Happened 15 times between the two divisions. 7 times in the West. The last time was in 2016-17. So it's been a while since 7 of the 8 teams made the playoffs in the Western Conference. In the East, it's happened 8 times since 99-2000. It's happened 8 times. And interesting enough, since COVID, 3 of the last 4 seasons, 7 of 8 teams have made the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. So as of Thanksgiving, since COVID, I tell you what, if your team is in right now, you've got 7 out of 8 chance to make it. And when you look at who's in right now and you talk about who is in with a few days to go before Thanksgiving, there's teams that we haven't seen in the playoffs in a while. Detroit right now is in first place in the Atlantic. Haven't seen them in the playoffs in a long time. Ottawa's in last year, and they've battled, had a tough start of this season. They're in as of the Monday of Thanksgiving week. Carolina right now is in first place in the East. They're going to be in. The Islanders and the Devils. Islanders are in first time. Haven't seen them in a while. The Boston Bruins are in, and the Philadelphia Flyers are in a playoff spot on the Monday of Thanksgiving. And I will say this for the Philadelphia Flyers, because I do believe that there are statistics that matter. And we talk about the 7 teams making it, 1 team not. There are teams that do better when they're in. And one of those teams is the Philadelphia Flyers. Since 1999-2000, the Philadelphia Flyers have been in a playoff spot at Thanksgiving 11 times. 11 times since 1999-2000. Of those 11 times they made the playoffs, all 11 times. There are 3 teams in the league that have been in on Thanksgiving that have always made the playoffs. That are the Florida Panthers are 5 for 5 in at Thanksgiving and on a playoff spot. Phillies 11 for 11, and the San Jose Sharks are 14 for 14. If the San Jose Sharks ever get in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving, dude, they're in. They're 14 for 14. There are some other teams that were close. Pittsburgh in 13 at Thanksgiving made the playoffs 12 times. Washington in 13 made it 12 times. Tampa in 13 times has made it 12 of those times. So they've only missed once. And the Colorado Avalanche have been in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving 14 times. Of those 14 times, they made the playoffs, 13 of them. So it does matter. And then there are teams you get concerned about. Toronto, the last time Toronto was out at Thanksgiving was 16-17. Right now they're sitting in last. It hasn't happened since 16-17 that they're out at Thanksgiving, but they did squeak into the playoffs. They got the 7th wild card spot on that season in 16-17. So they missed at Thanksgiving, but they made the playoffs. And you got to go back to Edmonton, another team that is potentially in and out and right around hovering in that spot. They have been out of the playoffs the last 3 seasons at Thanksgiving. All 3 seasons. 2 of those years, they made it to the finals of the Stanley Cup. So don't worry in Edmonton yet. They've been out of the playoffs all 3 of the last seasons at American Thanksgiving. Chicago, they're teasing. The last time they were in at Thanksgiving was 16-17, and they were first in the West, and they finished first in the West. But you don't win the cup unless you're in the playoffs on Thanksgiving. Since 99-2000, there has been 1 team that was not in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving that went on to win the Stanley Cup. 1 team since 99-2000, and that was the St. Louis Blues of 2018-19. Craig Berube gets hired, turns the team around. They go from worst to first, go on, march through the playoffs, and win the playoffs and hoist the Stanley Cup in 2018-19. Is the only team to ever win the cup when they were not in those playoff spot at Thanksgiving. The worst split ever is 5 in, 3 out at Thanksgiving. It's happened 6 times in the East and 6 times in the West, where it's a 5-3 split. It's never been 4-4 or worse, or more teams make it in. So yes, it is beneficial to be in a playoff spot at Thanksgiving time. And we already talked about the teams that are, once they're in, and it's Philadelphia, San Jose, and Florida are perfect on Thanksgiving. When they're in, they're in. There are a couple of teams that when they're in, they're not in. And that's the Vancouver Canucks and the New York Rangers. They have been in at Thanksgiving 6 times and missed the playoffs. They've been in 6 times at Thanksgiving and missed the playoffs at those times. They've been in and made it other times, but they lead the league in being in at Thanksgiving but not making the playoffs. Both happened to them 6 times. Now, there's other teams that are out at Thanksgiving, and that doesn't mean they're necessarily out. The 2 teams that have battled back 5 times are the New York Islanders and the Nashville Predators, out at Thanksgiving, in on a playoff spot. Happened 5 times. But the team that has not been in a spot on Thanksgiving but has come back to make it into the playoffs more than any other team in the National Hockey League is the Anaheim Ducks. They've been out 6 times when they were able to climb back in and make it in. And there are teams that when they're out, they're out. And they're out. Leading the way Sorry, Utah Mammoth. I'm grouping you in with Utah and Arizona. Been out of a playoff spot 16 times at Thanksgiving. Made the playoffs once of those 16 times. There's several teams that have only climbed back in one time. Chicago out 13 times, made it into a playoffs once. Detroit out 5 times, made it into a playoff spot once. Buffalo out at Thanksgiving 11 times, made the playoffs once. And Carolina out 10 times and made it once. So there are opportunities to be out and make it in. But those 5 teams, Utah, Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, Carolina, if you're out, you're out. Buffalo Sabres fans, you look to be out again. It's not looking good. But for Chicago's one of those funny teams. When Chicago's in, they're in. When they're out, they're out. It's when Chicago goes one way or the other. When they're in and make it into the playoffs 8 times, where they've been in at Thanksgiving, they make the playoffs 8 times. They've only missed once when they've been in at Thanksgiving. They're 8 out of 9 for in. But on the other end, when they're out, they're out. They've out 12 out of 13. And no team has been like that where they're in, or they're out more than the Chicago Blackhawks. So this is an important week for the Chicago Blackhawks. Can the Chicago Blackhawks somehow find themselves in a playoff position come American Thanksgiving? Can they break through and find themselves in a spot? They're 24 points right now in 22 games. Utah has 25 points in 22 games. They are 1 point behind the Utah Mammoth. They got to jump over some teams. Winnipeg, Edmonton, and San Jose are all between them and a playoff spot. But if Chicago can climb in, they're one of those teams that when they're in, and when they're out, they're out. So Chicago Blackhawks fans, hang in there and wait and see what the standings are Thursday morning when you get up. And see if Chicago has somehow been able to climb in and make it into the playoff spot. But that leads us to no games on Thanksgiving. Now, there's no hard fast rule, by the way, that there are no games on Thanksgiving in the NHL. There is a hard fast rule that they are off the 24th, 5th, and 6th of December. Can't practice, can't play, can't travel, can't do anything. 24th, 5th, 6th, which is great, by the way, if you're working. Maybe not as a fan, but it's definitely great when you're working for one of the teams or when you are a player. You just cannot wait for that time of year. And I will say this, you look at the schedule to see where you're playing on the 24th, and usually for the Arizona Coyotes, it was Buffalo. By the way, it's a very long flight from Buffalo back to Arizona. So there is no NHL hard fast rule that you cannot play on Thanksgiving Day, but it doesn't happen very often. The last time it happened was in 2019 on November 28th. The New Jersey Devils played in Montreal. New Jersey won that one, and you do see games in Canada. In 2016, there was a game in Montreal, a game in Ottawa. Both home teams won that. Montreal and Ottawa won those games in 2016. The last time an American city hosted a Thanksgiving Day game was in 2014. On November 27th, the Edmonton Oilers traveled to Nashville, and Nashville won that game 1-0. And the year prior to that, in 2013, those two teams met again, Edmonton and Nashville, in Nashville, 3-0 Edmonton. Ottawa again hosted in 2013, 2010 in Edmonton, 2009 there was a game in Ottawa and a game in Vancouver. So there's only been, since 2009, one city to host home games in the United States on American Thanksgiving, and that's the Nashville Predators. And I will say, kudos to the NHL for doing this. And I know the one thing I've always said about sports brings families together. It does. It brings people in front of the TV. It brings people to the arenas, stadiums, and it gets people together, especially on holidays. But on Thanksgiving, it's about football, and it's about families sitting. And that was the soundtrack of my youth, was listening to football games in the background. They were just on all day long, and it was part of the Thanksgiving celebration was football. We came from a hockey family, and it still wasn't hockey on Thanksgiving. It was football. And I think the NHL understands that it's, hey, you know what? Let's take a back seat. We're going to be okay. And they've got, you've got the Boston Bruins playing on Black Friday. Traditionally, since that day, then matinee games in Boston the day after Thanksgiving has become a tradition. And I look for them to host again in an afternoon game this season. But I do appreciate the NHL taking those days off, because it's not just the players, because half of those teams are on the league. 30 of the 32 teams play on the Friday after Thanksgiving. But that means 15 of those teams are on the road. And so it's not the players that are getting the opportunity to have Thanksgiving dinner with their families or the staffs that travel with them. But it does give the people that work at the arenas, the ticket takers, security, the marketing, the people that run the scoreboard, the officials, all of those people get that day to spend with their families. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think the NHL gets it. They do it at Christmas time, and they do it at Thanksgiving. And I know that a lot of fans would love to see their favorite teams playing on Thanksgiving. But just, I hate to say this, but just turn on football. So the NHL gets that right. The NHL gets Thanksgiving right. I want everybody here that's listening, and I know this is a small crowd here. We're not into the playoffs. We're not breaking down big game films. I know this is a pretty small, intimate crowd right now. Enjoy the week. Whether you're by yourself and you get some quiet time to get away from work, or with your family, or it's just a small family, or you're just sitting with your home alone with your dog or cat, like my son is doing this Thanksgiving. It's okay. Just enjoy the time you have away from work, hopefully. And you'll get back to hockey on Friday. So I do want to talk about other things that happen on Thanksgiving besides just the games. And I want to talk about the coaching staff. So if you go back a year ago right now, the Boston Bruins were in an absolute mess. Way out of a playoff spot, and there was trouble. Trouble brewing. And so what did they do? You got a Marchand was on the bench with Jim Montgomery, and there was some fallout there. Is there problems off the ice between those two? Well, we found out shortly Boston was done. And they fired Jim Montgomery a week before Thanksgiving. So he was the first coach fired, and it was a week before Thanksgiving. And as soon as he was released, the St. Louis Blues go, well, wait a minute. We got Drew Bannister. He's struggling. We're not thrilled with this. We want Montgomery. We want Monty leading our troops. So we're going to fire Drew Bannister. So he's fired before Thanksgiving. So two teams lose their coaches before Thanksgiving last year. We've got a couple of them shortly after that lost their jobs in December. When I go back to see who was in December, Chicago Blackhawks fired Luke Richardson on December 5th, and Derek Lalonde the day after Christmas. Ouch. Derek Lalonde let go the day after Christmas in Detroit. So four teams fired the coach before the first of the year. So that brings up, we're coming up with just this week is Thanksgiving. Is anybody going to eliminate their coach this week? Are we going to see any coaches change the week before Thanksgiving? Or is Thanksgiving going to be, hey, we got a day off, we're going to see some things change? Well, I think there's two in the East and two in the West that we can look at. And I think there are teams that, even if you're lower in the standings, that I think you're probably okay. Like the New York Rangers are second to last right now by a point. Mike Sullivan's fine. The Florida Panthers are 2 points out, and they're in seventh wildcard spot. Paul Maurice is fine. But there are two teams in the Eastern Conference you start to go, okay, are their seats getting a little bit hotter? I will say, I thought Dan Muse was going to be in one in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has had an outstanding start out of the gate. Boston Bruins have been great out of the gate. Rick Tocchet and the Philadelphia Flyers are in a playoff spot on the Monday before Thanksgiving. But the teams that you have to look at and go, okay, are we getting anywhere? And one of those teams is Toronto Maple Leafs. Like the Toronto Maple Leafs, as of the Monday of American Thanksgiving week, they are in last place. The Toronto Maple Leafs are in last place. No one had this with the Toronto Maple Leafs in last. And they're last in goal differential in the Eastern Conference. They're a -8. They've got one win on the road, and it's American Thanksgiving week. Like this team is 3-5-2 in their last 10. Toronto's struggling. Yes, injuries are a huge part of it. Of course, they're a huge part of it. And Matthews being gone, and Nyes is in and out, and everybody's been in and out of this lineup. Woll wasn't there to start the season, and the goaltending has struggled. Their goals against average has been poor. But is Craig Berube on the hot seat? The fear is that Brad Treliving has said no, everything's fine, but we all know that management giving you a stamp of approval doesn't mean much in the National Hockey League. So Craig Berube's chair is warming up. Do I think he's going to get fired before Thanksgiving? No, I really don't. I think if you see the Toronto Maple Leafs continue to flounder into February, and the injuries are over, the Olympics are over, and they've got a full roster back, and they're still finding themselves way out of a playoff spot, I think you might have to look at a change here. Toronto's not one that's patient with management, coaches, players. Like, they want to win. So Toronto and Craig Berube could part ways, but it's not going to be till after the first of the year. I don't think. I think it's going to be too soon right now. The other spot in the Eastern Conference is the Buffalo Sabres. And the Buffalo Sabres and Lindy Ruff, I wondered when they brought him back to begin with, and that fit with them in the Eastern Conference. Right now they have 22 points. They're only 3 points out. They're 500. They're 9-4 through 22 games. But again, only one win on the road. They're 1-5-2 on the road. They have won 2 in a row. But the Buffalo Sabres, to me, are a team that when you see those teams spiking, like we talked about Detroit and Ottawa and Montreal, yeah, they're getting through the rebuilds. They're going to start making the playoffs. Said the same thing about Buffalo year after year after year after year. And here they continually are at the bottom of the standings in the Eastern Conference. So I do think that they're one of the teams that if you have to talk about hot seat, I think Lindy Ruff has to be on the hot seat. But again, do I think he's gone by Thanksgiving in the U.S.? I do not. I think the Eastern Conference is going to hold pat, but those are the 2 guys to watch out in the Eastern Conference. And on the Western Conference, Andrew Brunette, they're last again. They're 9 points out. They're 6-11-4. They have 1 road win to this point in regulation on the road. Nashville Predators are struggling. Andrew Brunette at some point is going to have to take the brunt of this. Barry Trotz might talk about roster construction and how they're doing in Nashville, but Andrew Brunette's in trouble. And in the hot seat in the Western Conference, I believe, starts in Nashville. Now, you also look at the standings and, okay, Calgary's out of it. Well, what about the Calgary Flames? I don't think Huska's in trouble there. I think he's too new. I think they're going to give him an opportunity. I think you look at what that roster construction is, and I don't think that they're going to make a change in Calgary with Ryan Huska. So are there other teams in the Western Conference that you might see a coaching change before the end of the season? And they're kind of like we were saying in the East is things are tight. Like once you get past Nashville and Calgary, everybody's within 5 points. Vancouver, St. Louis, Chicago, these teams, they're not making changes. Winnipeg and Edmonton, clearly not making changes. San Jose, where Sofsky, he's tied for the last spot in the playoffs. So no, I don't think in the Western Conference, and this one's going to be a little interesting because they're in a playoff spot right now. And we always talk about the Utah Mammoth. There's a lot of pressure in Utah. There's a lot of pressure. They're 3-4-3 in their last 10. They have a goal differential -1. Goal differential, by the way, which we'll talk about much later, is a much better indicator of who's going to make the playoffs than Thanksgiving Day. Just letting you know. The plus-minus of goal differential, you can almost bet on it. It's not close. So for Utah, they're 6-2-1 at home. They just need to play more home games. They played 13 games on the road. They played 9 at home. They need to play more home games, and that's where it can help turn their season around. But with the new ownership that brought the coaching staff and the management group from Arizona to Utah, they're just under more pressure. And I think they've done an outstanding job there. Bill Armstrong's built a great team. He's got good draft picks. The rebuild is moving quickly. They brought in J.J. Peterka, which changed their playoff picture for this year. They're in a playoff spot right now. And I believe they need to be in one. And if they're not in one after January and February, the concern for Andre Tourigny will start to grow. Now, I think Andre Tourigny has been a very good coach in Arizona and Utah. I think he's squeezed the most out of a group that he didn't have much talent in over the last few years. He makes it fun to go to the rink. All of those things are true, but this could be an opportunity, and just could be an opportunity for an owner who wants to have his own people in place in all of the major positions on his team. It gives him an opportunity to go, okay, I just want to make a change. And I don't know if in any other organization other than Utah, if you would see a team that's doing this well that would start to look at their coach. I don't think it's imminent. I don't think it's anything happening Thanksgiving or Christmas or first of the year. I'm not sitting here saying he's on the hot seat. I'm just saying the pressure in Utah is there to make the playoffs. It's different than it's been in Arizona/Utah for years. Now there is finally pressure to make the playoffs in Utah. And as the season progresses, that is going to be part of what's important in Utah. Yeah, I think the playoffs are important there. So I do think that Andre Tourigny has to continue to play meaningful games late in the season in Utah. They're hanging on to the last wild card spot right now. They have 25 points. They're on pace right now for 93 points. 93 points used to be the mark to get it done. Now it's got to be 95. So they're close. They're right around that last playoff spot if they continue to play the way they're playing now. And I honestly think they'll play better because they have more games at home. So I think it's realistic to think that the Utah Mammoth can find themselves in a playoff spot this season. I really, really do. Last season at Thanksgiving, this team was 9-10-3. They had 21 points and a winning percentage of .477. They were seventh wild card spot in the West, 3 points out of last, 4 points out of playoff spot. So we always said this in Arizona and Utah, as long as they're growing and going in the right direction. And right now, this Utah Mammoth Hockey Club is. They're taking strides forward. and they're going in the right direction. As of Monday of American Thanksgiving week, the Utah Mammoth are in a playoff spot. So curious to see how they do. They've got the Vegas Golden Knights Monday night tonight, and they have the Montreal Canadiens on Wednesday. They need to get points. Those games are both at home. They've got to get points. They need to be in a playoff position come Thanksgiving. Because I think when we talked about where they are, this team, Utah/Arizona, has been in a playoff spot 6 times at Thanksgiving Day since 1999. They've made the playoffs 4 times. So Utah needs to get points out of these next 2 games between Vegas and Montreal to see themselves in. We talked about them in at Thanksgiving, making the playoffs 4 times. When they're out 15 out of 16. They're out. So let's keep an eye on the Utah Mammoth as they approach Thanksgiving Day this Thursday. They lost 7 of 9, but they have points in 5 of their last 6, so thanks to some overtime points. And they had that tough road trip, but now they're getting longer stretches at home. So let's see if the Utah Mammoth can start to get their home record together and continue to stay in that playoff fight, especially around Thanksgiving. Well, that's all for today. We're just going to make a little shorter episode talking about Thanksgiving. I want everybody to get out and enjoy their Thanksgiving and watch the standings because it does matter. If your team is in a playoff spot on Thanksgiving, they've got a 75%. That's 3-4. That means 6 out of 8 teams that are in the playoffs right now are in. And I tell you what, if you're one of those 3 teams, Philadelphia, Florida, or San Jose are in a playoff spot since 99-2000, your team has never missed the playoffs when they are in a playoff spot at Thanksgiving. So, for me, I'm going to wrap things up here from inside the coach room. Stay tuned, because when we get after the Thanksgiving, we get closer to the new year, we're going to do a lot more video breakdowns getting ready for playoffs and kind of show you what's going around the league. That's what we do inside the coach room. We break down game film and teach you a little bit about the game. So thanks for joining me today on this very shortened Thanksgiving Day special. Keep an eye on your team. And if you want to know how your team did over Thanksgiving since 1999-2000, just send me a DM in X or Blue Sky or YouTube. Send me a comment, and I'll be glad to fill you in on how your team has done since 99-2000 on Thanksgiving. Thanks for coming inside the coach's room. I'm Petey, and we'll see you at the ring.